maybe 16, 17 years old, these questions started coming to me, because now I'm only a few years away from possibly having an arranged marriage with someone in this church. I never rejected my parents' belief system, nor did I ever accept it, either within myself or even to my parents, and said, you know what, this is what I believe, or this is not what I believe. I was really into science growing up as a kid, and then I decided, you know what, I want to understand what are the fundamental building blocks of the universe. So that's kind of the study of what's called quantum physics and quantum mechanics. If the nature of the universe is infinite, how can you grasp the infinite with just your 5 sense organ? Went to this hotel where Sadhguru was staying, and I'm waiting in the lobby, and now I'm in an elevator with Sadhguru and one other volunteer, and I was just overwhelmed by the whole experience. Like that day when I met Mooji, his presence was one of just pure compassion. I think almost this entire time I had never asked Sadhguru a question, but I had this burning question in me. What in the world do I do with my life? What direction do I take my life in? So I got the opportunity to get the microphone, and I asked him, out of all these different long-term paths that Isha has to offer, how do I decide what path to take?
Namaskaram, everybody, and welcome back to the podcast. In today's episode, we have David tuning in from the US. The two of us met at the Isha Yoga Center. He was also part of the Sadhanapada batch, and I remember he was one of the first people that I saw at the ashram doing a practice that I did not know at that time. And I was just looking at him and I was like, just the intensity that was there when he was doing his practices. I was like, this is how I want to be. This is how I want to be within myself. This is how I want to do the practices. Because at that point in time, I was doing Shambhavi in engineering practice. Other than that, I did not learn any other practices, and I was like just blown away by so many people at the ashram. But I remember him because he was part of the batch, and I saw him. So now listening to his story, he's been blessed to be in Sadhguru's physical presence so many times. So he shared a lot of experience that he had in the US, volunteering for certain programs, even being part of a TV show with Sadhguru and the AdiYogi consecration at the III in the US. I definitely enjoyed his sharing, and I hope you do so as well.
Namaskaram, everyone. It's good to see you, Stephen. Namaskaram. My name's David. For me to share about Sadhanapada, it almost seems out of context if I'm not sharing kind of certain events that happened before and just certain things that I went through. So I thought, it's like you can tell a story, This year being 2021 will be about 9 years since I took my first Isha program. So we're almost there at a decade. I originally grew up in New York State, not the city, but in kind of a small suburb town. So how I got into spirituality and Isha is kind of an interesting story because I grew up in a very religious household. My parents were part of what kind of most Westerners would kind of consider like something like a cult, but it was actually more Christian based. So it was very the roots of the religion or the belief systems that my parents tried to raise me and my siblings to grow up in are Christian based. It's very Christianity, but the only two big differences between kind of what most people consider as Christianity and kind of the religion that my parents tried to raise me and my siblings in is one thing is they believe that the second Messiah, like the second coming of Jesus, was a man who started the church, who was actually originally from Korea. So Stephen, if you were wondering how I had the Korean first name Shinsung, that I went through, in Sadhanapada, my parents gave me a Korean first name based on the fact that the man who started their church was from Korea, and they spent a lot of time in Korea doing missionary work, and so the church that I grew up in was very influenced by Asian culture, especially Korean culture. And I would say one of the major differences from regular Christianity is that generally speaking, when we got to university age, age 20 years old, a lot of people had arranged marriages which was kind of strange. So how it all started for me is like growing up, I was just like a normal kid, right? I went to summer camp, I went to school, I had friends playing video games, all the normal stuff. But as I got older, I never once in my life said to my parents, or even within myself, I never said, this is what I believe or I don't believe. I never rejected my parents' belief system, nor did I ever accept it, either within myself or even to my parents, and said, you know what, this is what I believe or this is not what I believe. So by the time I was maybe 16, 17 years old, these questions started coming to me, because now I'm only a few years away from possibly having, an arranged marriage with someone in this church, if I continue just on being like a normal person, in this church. So I had never really asked these deep questions like, does God really exist? Is this really like a Messiah? Is this like a belief system that I really believe in? So I started kind of digging deeper within myself, because these are huge questions that I ignored my whole childhood. And now that I'm 16, 17 years old, now I have to really start digging and find out, because now I'm soon to be an adult, And I kind of started my journey actually with science, ironically. I was really into science growing up as a kid. It was like one of my favorite classes in school. So in my free time, I spent a lot of time watching documentaries on cosmology, which is the study of planets and galaxies and stuff like that. And kind of one of the big things that hit me there was that our top scientists in the world, they find things that they can't explain. For instance, they saw in their calculations that there's something called dark matter and dark energy, which they only know is there through mathematics, but they don't understand anything about it. So I thought that was kind of interesting, that we kind of don't know about the universe, already from our top scientists. So from there, I kind of was studying the macro, the larger scale of the universe. And then I decided, you know what, I want to understand kind of what are the fundamental building blocks of the universe. And so that you go into the micro. So that's kind of the study of what's called quantum physics and quantum mechanics. Now, of course, I never took classes on this. I wasn't, a PhD in this, but I did a lot of research on, watching through documentaries mostly. And one of the things, I don't know, Stephen, if you've ever kind of watched some documentaries on quantum mechanics, quantum physics, but it's super crazy. Like our top scientists who study this, they study the fundamental particles that make up an atom. And they say, when you try to understand how these fundamental building blocks function, it becomes almost, as Sadhguru has said, non-logical, like fuzzy logic. Like it starts not making sense. In the sense, like certain particles can be at two places at once, or they can be in multiple places. And one of the things that stood out to me was actually I found this 10-minute video, which was like a huge life-changing moment for me. It's on YouTube, and I'll share it with you maybe after the podcast, and we can put it in the description. It was this 10-minute video of these top quantum physicists talking about how the universe as we kind of understand it on like a large scale and in society is like totally different than what we thought, because of things aren't really how they appear, in the sense that one of the examples they gave is, when you look at something, it changes how it behaves. And so they kind of came to the conclusion that human beings are kind of somehow interlocked with how we perceive the universe and how it functions, and so in this video, there's multiple quantum physicists talking about this. And then in the second half of the video, they play different spiritual teachers who are kind of talking about the same ideas. And it's really cool because, first they had a Buddhist monk talking about this, how kind of things along lines with science have actually been going along with Buddhism. And then there was this man in the clip who they never showed any of these teachers' names or like where they're from or anything. They're just showing like a clip of them talking, maybe for a few seconds. And one of them was Sadhguru. And it's just him talking about how if the nature of the universe is infinite, how can you grasp the infinite with just your five sense organs of, seeing, touching, smelling, tasting? And that video, I remember by the end of it, I'm only 17 years old. This is like 2010, but I'm like in tears at the end of it, because something inside of me broke, of like my understanding of the universe was totally kind of what you could say is like what the general public kind of thinks about it. And this video totally like shattered that for me, because it's like, wow, the universe is way more mysterious and way more complex, and we really don't understand it yet,
The first video that I saw of Sadhguru was the one with David Eagleman, I think, like the scientist, and they talk
Oh
about
yeah.
how the Buddha, like Sadhguru talks about, how the Buddha went into his consciousness and could trace back his past lives into,
Mm-hmm.
the microbe, and actually this is like similarly to what you're sharing. This was the similarities or the correlation of science and spirituality is what actually got me to want to know more about this.
Mm-hmm.
So I love that.
Yeah, it's funny how I think that draws a lot of people, because science and spirituality are not separate entities. They're
Mm,
actually commingled all together,
yes.
And I think, as a lot of people think, is I think science will come at some of the same realizations that spirituality
Mm,
has been talking about for a long time.
yes.
So to continue from there, I still didn't know who Sadhguru was at all, because all it was a 10-second clip of him talking along with other spiritual teachers. But from there, I kind of got the idea that, okay, quantum physicists are talking about this word consciousness a lot. And so the word consciousness kind of commingled with a lot of keywords on the internet with like meditation. So it was actually kind of ironic that you've been uploading these like music kind of
Mm,
like binaural beats, because that was actually some of the first meditations I ever tried. Was I just went on YouTube and typed in like meditations, and some of the first ones I experimented and found on the internet were like, I just lay in bed at night with my headphones in and listen to like binaural beats, and they weren't, they didn't really bring you to that true meditative state. They were kind of more like psychedelic in nature, in terms of like the experience they gave you. um, so now, I had many things happen in my external life that kind of distracted me for some time. I graduated high school, and then I went off to community college. And so now it's 2 years later in 2012. And I kind of get back into this idea of wanting to search the truth, and to kind of get back real quick. I ended up meeting this girl while I was in high school, like our last semester of high school, and we kind of got into a serious relationship. And then from there, I kind of had said to my family, through that, like, I think this is the person I want to be with for right now, and I don't think I want to have an arranged marriage. I think they kind of
mm,
got that by the fact that I was in a relationship already. So then from there, I decided to continue my search when I was in community college. And I remember one day I took a college course that was on the world religions. And I remember we studied about Buddhism and Hinduism. And I remember in the class hearing this word enlightenment. And so one day I go onto YouTube when I'm at home and I type in the word enlightenment. And literally one of the first videos that comes up at the top results was Sadhguru sharing his experience at Chamundi Hill. And from there, I was absolutely hooked. Like, and I instantly recognized within a few videos, I was like, this is the guy that I saw 2 years ago in that video that like brought me to tears. Um, and so 2012 for me was like the year where I binged watched every Sadhguru video possible on YouTube just for months on end. And one of the things I wanted to mention was, of course, when you binge watch, his videos, you come across Isha Kriya. And at the time, I had tried a lot of different guided meditations on YouTube, and they definitely brought you to a sense of like relaxation and peace and everything. But as you know from Isha Kriya, one of the directions is to do it twice a day for 40 days at least, if you can. And so I remember trying that when I first discovered Isha Kriya, and I remember within 5 days of continuing the practice, that like one day I sat for Isha Kriya and I had touched like a stillness and like a certain energy within myself that was way different than any guided meditation I'd ever tried before. It was distinctly different, you know? And I was like, wow, you know, like this is not even like a program that I took. This is just like a free guided meditation on YouTube. And it brought me to already like the deepest experience I had already had in my whole life. And so from there, I was so thirsty to like meet Sadhguru and to take, you know, one of the programs and everything. And I just at the time, I also, you know, remember him talking about how important sadhana was, but I had no sadhana other than like Isha Kriya. So I went to a lot of studio yoga classes at the time. I didn't know at the time that maybe those aren't really healthy for you, in the sense that, you know, you could be doing the practice wrong or in the wrong order of poses and stuff like that, you know, about asanas. But so I remember I had like my own sadhana routine, even though I hadn't taken any program yet. I would be doing, you know, Isha Kriya, and I'd be doing like 1 hour of Hatha yoga at home. But it was kind of like my own practice of just whatever I could pick up from the classes. And then finally in October of 2012, I took inner engineering online. And, you know, from there, I remember one of the big changes that happened was in that program, he talks about vegetarian diet. So I remember pretty much as soon as I finished the program, I went vegetarian, and it was a big shock to my family because like almost every other meal has like chicken or steak or something in it, you know. So that was definitely a big change for my family to see me change my diet and everything. And at the time when I finished inner engineering online, you have to remember this is 2012, so the website wasn't what it is now. And I remember when you finish the program, it tries to tell you, okay, these are the upcoming programs. And the only one that it listed was Sadhguru doing an engineering program out in Australia. I was like, I'm too far from Australia. I can't afford to go that far. So I waited until 2013, like spring of 2013. Sadhguru has, back then he used to do 3-day inner engineering programs. It was the full program, not just like, you didn't have to take the inner engineering online in order to take the program. It was like the full thing, like everything included that you would have learned from inner engineering online. So I had signed up for that program, and I was so gung-ho about going to this program that I even prematurely signed up for BSP. And then I had even gotten my Indian visa, my passport, because I was like, oh, this summer I'm going to take inner engineering with Sadhguru, then I'm going to take BSP, and then I'm going to go to India and go travel and go see Dhyana Linga and everything. So I'm at the airport to go fly to Atlanta, Georgia, where the program was happening with Sadhguru. I'm literally at the gate, and we're about to board, like within an hour of boarding time, all of a sudden they come over the announcement and say, this flight has been canceled due to weather. And I go up to the lady at the desk. I'm like, when's the next flight going out to Atlanta, Georgia? They said, we can't get you there until like midnight tonight. And then I call one of the volunteers for the program. I said, you know, my flight just got canceled because of weather. I can make it there tonight at midnight. Is that okay? And they talked to one of the teachers, and the teacher said, no, if you can't make the first day of the program, you can't come at all. And oh my God, I broke down in tears right there in the airport, because I had planned out this whole summer of taking this program, and I was so excited to see Sadhguru for the first time and take the program. And I remember just sitting in the airport crying, because, you know, the airport was kind of far from my house. So now I just had to turn back in defeat and so much disappointment about everything that happened, and go back. But then maybe 2 months later, I had finally discovered that actually at the Tennessee ashram, that they had been doing inner engineering programs like once a month. I didn't know that. Apparently I just had discovered it. So I decided to take my program there, you know, with the teacher. And one of the things that happened there is I remember I was so gung-ho that 4 days later there was a Shunya program, and I decided to take pretty much essentially both programs at the same time. And I even had a teacher warn me, like, I wouldn't do this because of the mandala you have to do in terms of doing 2 practices for 40 days. And let me tell you, it was really tricky because I was in, university at the time, taking classes, and I also had a full-time girlfriend, and I was living with family who didn't understand like spirituality and doing Kriya yoga, and so I had to do, 45 days of 2 Shambhavis and 2 Shakti Chandra Kriyas, all while balancing everything else going on in my life. And so finally, later that year, 2013, if you remember, in September, they celebrate something called Isha Fest, which is, I believe it's like, the day Sadhguru was enlightened, sometime in September. So they have a celebration every year in Tennessee at the ashram. And they had announced that right after Isha Fest, that Sadhguru would hold something special called a sadhana satsang. So it wasn't a traditional satsang where he's just sitting there talking. He actually was doing different processes with the whole crowd. And why this was so impactful for me is this was the first time I ever saw Sadhguru in person. And I had the opportunity in a lot of those sessions to sit like front and row directly right in front of him. And Stephen, you were there at Sadhanapada, and you remember we had a lot of satsangs and darshans with him, and each darshan kind of had its own different quality to it. Remember, I think there was this one we had in AdiYogi where it was much more intense than any of the other darshans, and people afterwards like, wow, that one was really intense. Sadhguru was like turning up the dial on this one. This was the first time I ever saw Sadhguru, at this Isha Fest Sadhana Satsang. And this was, even to this day, was the one where he turned it up the most, like on full crank. And it was so impactful for me because, like, just to share one experience there was, we had an evening satsang with him where we got to have like a question and answer session with him. And this one woman stands up and asks, Sadhguru, please tell me about your guru. I want to know about like your relationship with your guru. And he just said, next question, please. And the woman still had the microphone, and she's like, no, Sadhguru, please, I want to know so badly, please tell me about it. And he just closed his eyes and refused to speak for like 10 minutes straight. And you know how sometimes people in the crowd can be, they start screaming and going wild when the energies get intense. He just sat there with his eyes closed, refused to speak. And even the people who were running the satsang, like the meditators at the audio booth and everything, they're just like, they didn't know what to do because, like the whole satsang just came to a halt where like we were in the middle of a question and answer session. He's just sitting there, eyes closed, refusing to speak. And finally, after like 10 minutes of the whole crowd just screaming like full blast, he just says, what can I say about the man who obliterated me? And so that being said, that was so impactful on me because that was the first time I ever saw Sadhguru in person, and I got to sit like front row right there for a lot of the sessions. And it was just that whole sadhana satsang. Like I said, it wasn't just, he was doing certain processes there. It wasn't just a regular satsang. It was very intense for me. So I got to participate in that. And then one of the crazy things that happened is only a few months later, now it's early 2014. So it's like this time of year, like January, February of 2014. We had a 4-day inner engineering program in Toronto, Canada. And I'm from New York, so I just had a train ride to go up there. But they had announced that even though this was going to be a teacher-led program, that immediately after the program, the next day, that Sadhguru would be there in Toronto to have a meditator satsang. So I said, this is an awesome opportunity for me. I'm going to go up to Toronto, volunteer for the 4-day program, and then on the 5th day, Sadhguru will be there, for a satsang. So I went and volunteered for the program, and it was funny because I reached out to the volunteers before the program started. I said, hey, I live in New York. I'm coming all the way from the United States to Canada to volunteer for this program. Do you have anybody who's willing to like host me in their home for the duration of the program? And they said, yeah, here's his contact details. You guys get in touch with each other. And so everything looked like it was going according to plan. But then the first night I showed up to the program hall, and at the end of the volunteering, the guy had never shown up who was supposed to let me stay with him. So at the end of the night, when we wrapped up the first night of the program, I go up to one of the coordinators. I'm like, I don't have anywhere to stay. My person who was supposed to host me never showed up. And they're like, okay, no problem. He goes over to another volunteer that he knew and said, do you mind to let David staying with you for the program? And, while he's here, volunteering. He said, yeah, no problem. And this guy was a really nice guy. He was, probably in his 30s or something. And why this was significant is because on the last day of the program, on the initiation day, he tells me, by the way, the reason why Sadhguru is coming to Toronto tomorrow is because I work for one of the big TV studios here in Toronto. It's like one of the biggest TV shows in all of Canada. And I talked to my boss and I organized to have Sadhguru come on the show and have an interview. And, since you're staying with me, I'm inviting you to come with me, but you have to get the teacher's permission first. And so I was like, no way. I was so blown away by this experience. I was like, no way, this can't be happening. And so I go up to the teacher at the end of the program. I don't know if you've met her, but it was Gomati. I go up to Gomati and I'm like, so this is a situation. I'm staying with this volunteer and he has to go meet Sadhguru tomorrow for this interview. And he wanted me to ask if it's okay if I went with him. And she's like, oh yeah, no problem. So the next day, we went to this hotel where Sadhguru was staying, and I'm waiting in the lobby and I have my coat with me and I have the other volunteer's coat with me. And I remember I'm just sitting there waiting in the lobby, and then both the volunteer and Sadhguru come down to the lobby, and I just do namaskara. And I run over, hand the other volunteer his coat back, and then Sadhguru comes and just puts his arm around me, like in such a comforting, compassionate way. And I just didn't know what to do, so I just put my arm back around him, and I didn't say a word like the entire time, basically, because he was asking the other volunteer questions of like, what kind of show is this? What kind of other guests and celebrities does he have on? Just kind of these questions. And then me and the volunteer walk over. It's like 2 blocks away from the TV studio. And Sadhguru gets driven there from like another volunteer. And then we meet him again at the studio. And it's funny because a lot of people like to joke about awkward elevator rides. Well, it was so weird because like I had just taken my program 6 months back or whatever, and now I'm in an elevator with Sadhguru and one other volunteer, and it was one of those just super quiet. I didn't want to say anything inappropriate, do anything inappropriate, but I'm standing next to Sadhguru in an elevator as we ride up to go up to this TV studio. And that was a crazy experience just in general. I'd never been inside a TV studio like that before. And Sadhguru actually gave a really cool interview. Like the guy asked questions about like what happens after death. And unfortunately, like the final edit that came out on the TV show was like not as good, and they cut things out and out of context, you know what I mean? Like, so the true interview that happened was actually really cool to watch, like in person, but unfortunately the final edit was not good. But for anyone who's kind of wondering, who might maybe be from Canada, it was called the George Strombopoulos Show, and apparently in Canada, that's like the biggest talk show. And so it was like a big deal for Canada to have Sadhguru on, because that's like their biggest show in that country.
How was the experience of being close to Sadhguru? I mean, like physical touch. Was there anything that like a body sensation or something that happened? Like,
I mean, I was just overwhelmed by the whole experience, and also like when he put his arm around me and everything, it was just like this sense of pure compassion. Like, even though I was like maybe like 20 years old at the time, he was putting his arm around me like as if I was like a small child, and just like as if you would put your arm around like a 5-year-old kid. That's how I felt inside, and that was kind of the like as if like a fatherly kind of like compassionate like embrace, so that's kind of how I felt. It wasn't like some big spiritual thing happening. So to move on quickly, another experience I wanted to share is not not that long after that. So of course we had the interview, and then immediately after we had a satsang with him, and I got to sit front row for that because me and the other volunteer had to rush from the studio and go to the program hall and set up the carpets and do all this, set up the dais and everything. So um, about a month or two after that, it was funny. Sadhguru had an inner engineering program in Atlanta at the same spot that I was supposed to go to 1 year earlier, and this time I'm going as a volunteer. And I don't know if you remember Ravi, who became a Swami while we were in Sadhanapada. That's where I met him. This is now April of 2014. I met Ravi there, and he was the coordinator of the program hall. And so he put me on the program for like the hall team. And
how cool is that? Like you met somebody back in the world, and then you saw him transition into full time and then into a Swami.
Yeah,
that's so cool.
And same with Jordan. I had met Jordan many years before, and so Jordan and Ravi was such an incredible experience. That, and I think there was at least one or two other females who were like residents at the ashram in Tennessee, who I think now are mas or brahmacharis. So it's been such a cool experience to see people I knew and had like a certain friendship relationship with, and watch them become swamis. It was really interesting. So one of the funny experiences I had there was at the program in Atlanta was not only was I part of the hall team, but I was also asked to be part of the Sadhguru's security team, which I only needed to be used like twice. But you know how sometimes like you have to form like a little security around Sadhguru because people will literally just rush at him. So we had a lunch break in this program where we have the big program hall, and then next to the program hall where you have to walk out in the hallway, we had a large dining setup. And so I was part of the security team to walk with Sadhguru outside the program hall and into the like dining hall. And the tables all had little signs on them that said the name of each United State. So, like Tennessee, Georgia, New York, Pennsylvania. And the point of this was to like encourage the participants of the program to like meet people from their own state and like, oh, you're from this city, that's so cool, and like get to know each other. So as we walk in, Sadhguru's like, oh, what's this? And I know I shouldn't have done this, but at the time I was very like playful. Like when I was younger, I was much more playful. Like, I don't know how to say this. Like I like joked around a lot back then. And I don't know what came over me, but I turned to Sadhguru. I sarcastically said to Sadhguru, I was like, oh, what state are you from? And he's like, where's the Tennessee table? But when I asked him, what state are you from? He just turned and looked at me and just whacked me like right in the stomach. Like, not like he wasn't angry, but he just, he kind of took it in the joking.
That's like a dad. Yeah, it's like a dad.
Well, he took it like he knew it was a joke, and I was just being kind of playful with him. But of course, now I would never do that. Like I was just what I was thinking at the time. I don't know why. It just came over me to just joke with him. And he's like, where's the table for Tennessee? I think that he did end up sitting down with the people who were from Tennessee and ate with them. So immediately after that program in Atlanta that I volunteered for was my BSP that I took as a participant. And it's pretty incredible because I think Sadhguru doesn't do BSP anymore, I believe. I could be wrong. Maybe there's going to be some in the future. But in America, only up until maybe 2018, they had never done a BSP that was taught by a teacher. It was always done with Sadhguru, which is kind of the opposite of India. They don't really do BSP with Sadhguru. It's all teacher-led. So, of course, I won't share any of the details about like, what happens within BSP, but I guess I can share kind of some powerful experiences that happened with me. Was just that I had an opportunity where kind of like this, where I'm sharing a lot about like my past and my family, like we are now, like on this podcast. I had the opportunity to stand up with the microphone, and there's like 1,000 other participants, and Sadhguru just sitting there quietly listening to what I had to say about just sharing experience about my family and my past and kind of some of my deepest, thoughts and desires. Like I had an opportunity to just stand there, and it was so awesome because I'm standing there just sharing, like pouring my heart out to him about everything that was going on in my life and everything that I was thought about and my parents and everything. And so that was just such a wonderful experience for me to really kind of open myself up in that way, and not only to share it in front of like 1,000 other people, but also in front of Sadhguru. And he didn't ignore me. He sat there with his eyes just looking and listening like carefully. And so that was a huge experience for me. And a lot of things like kind of subtly changed after like BSP, in a lot of ways that even today it's like hard to, understand like things that changed after BSP. But of course I won't go into any of the details about like some of the things that, the things we did in BSP, but it was an amazing experience, So immediately after my BSP, I decided to stay at the ashram. I had just graduated before I went to this Atlanta program in BSP. I just graduated from community college, which in America is like a 2-year university. You just get like a 2-year associate's degree, it's called. So I didn't really know what I was doing with my life at the time, and it's summertime anyways. So I decided to stay at the ashram and volunteer full time for about 3 months. And that was an amazing experience because at the time, I don't know what it's like now, but at the time, the Tennessee ashram, Isha Institute of Inner Sciences, they only had maybe like 50 residents, like 50. They had maybe 50 residents who were living there and doing everything. Of course, people would come for programs to help volunteer a little bit here and there, but like it's incredible because when you and I were at the ashram in India, there's like 4,000 people living there, and there's hundreds of people that come in every day to come work. And you feel like just one drop in the ocean there. Like you're like, no one even remembers who you are half the time at that ashram. And you just feel like a drop in the bucket, right? But there at the ashram in Tennessee, you're such an integral part of what's happening because you're doing all the cooking and cleaning together. You're running the programs together. You're keeping up with the daily schedule together. And I feel like I really created like a bond with a lot of the people and was really inspired by a lot of the residents who were there at that ashram. Like I feel like even now I still have such a deep respect for a lot of those residents because they're, I don't know, just to run a place like that and have such a tight-knit community like that and still run such a powerful space. And the reason why I chose to leave at the time, I did about 3 months of long-term volunteering there, is one day I get a phone call from my sister, my older sister, who said that my mom had gone into the hospital. And to kind of get into personal things, because everything's sort of tied in, so that's why I'm bringing it up, is when I was 13 years old, my mom was diagnosed with cancer, and she had been battling it, going through chemotherapy for my entire upbringing, essentially from age 13 onwards. And so like I said, my mom had some things happening and went into the hospital. At the time she was fine. Like she called me like, no, you don't have to come home from the ashram, from Tennessee, you just stay there and enjoy yourself. But I was like, no, I this is like, it's important to be with family when they're sick. I should come home. So from the time I came back until about February of 2015, so maybe like 6, 7, 8 months, I'm just at home working and being with my family. And kind of one of the big things that happened was that in February of 2015, like this is like 7 months later after I've come home from the ashram, that my mother's condition in terms of her health had like dramatically plummeted from the point where like she was walking around the house cooking and being talkative and everything, to like within like a 2-week period she was like bedridden and couldn't speak and couldn't do any activity. And we even had like a hospice nurse come by and like take care of her and certain things that we couldn't help her with. And I remember one night I woke up and my older sister standing over me, and I thought, this is strange because my older sister lives with her husband like 30 minutes away, and she's standing over me, like shaking me, like, David, wake up, like mom's just passed away. And I was like, no way. And we all sit in the room where her bedroom was, and I remember I just tried to sit there and be like in a meditative state going through this experience. And I remember the nurse came by and did kind of like the final, okay, this is the time of death. And I remember at that moment I just broke down crying, like something like just all the emotions that these last like multiple years of dealing with all of that had just broken. And this idea of like, you're never going to see your mom again and never going to get a chance to speak to her, because we had a good relationship. I mean, we had our disagreements about like religion and stuff like that, but otherwise it was like a typical mother-son relationship. So that was really difficult for me. And then another pretty bad event happened just a few weeks after the funeral of my mom, which was that this girl that I told you that I was in a relationship with from high school, now we had been together for about 4 years. And for various reasons I won't go into, because, relationship problems, but essentially we decided to end our relationship, and kind of it ended in a bad way. And this was right after my mom's funeral, like, within a few weeks. And if you can imagine, I lost like the two closest people to me in my entire life. I just lost my mother. I just lost my girlfriend of 4 years. And it was, a serious relationship where we thought we were going to be like married and have children together. So if you can imagine, it was like totally broken inside in so many ways. And the only thing that I could think to do was just go back to the ashram. And I don't really condone that, because obviously I think if you ask them, like, maybe we shouldn't be having people who are going through a lot of turmoil come to the ashram, but that's what I had decided to do, was just head back to the ashram. And I felt like it wasn't appropriate to be in the house anymore, after my mom had passed away there. And I just decided to go back to the ashram. And it was definitely very helpful for me to be there, to kind of get back into the sadhana routine and create a certain amount of stability. And Sadhguru was there for a lot of the time that I was there. For instance, I got to volunteer for BSP for the first time there, and it was with Sadhguru. And one of the things that happened there was that Sadhguru will always do a satsang with just the volunteers. So usually a teacher will run the program for one session, and while that's all happening, all the volunteers will get together and we'll get to have a satsang with Sadhguru as just our group of volunteers. And I think almost this entire time I had never asked Sadhguru a question, but I had this burning question in me, which is what in the world do I do with my life? Like, what direction do I take my life in? So I got the opportunity to get the microphone, and I asked him, I said, out of all these different long-term paths that Isha has to offer, whether it's being a hatha yoga teacher or being like an inner engineering teacher, or like just a resident, or whatever, or even becoming a brahmachari, like, out of all these different things, how do I decide what path to take? And I even said to him, looking at him, I said, I actually offer this choice to you, but if I have to decide for myself, how do I choose this path? And it was a really powerful way in what he answered, because actually at first, when I finished asking the question and I sat back down, he just sat there with his eyes closed and didn't speak for several seconds. And he just said that, imagine if you wanted to go to Nashville, which is a city in Tennessee. As you know, the fastest way between 2 points is a straight line. Or you could take the winding road, like you take the highway to get to Nashville. Let's say you want to walk. If you were to take a straight line, you're cutting through the woods, through treacherous mountains, and you might be covered in thorns and ticks, insect bites, and go through really tough terrain. And you might be halfway there and you might think I'm the devil. I said, or you walk the road, it's longer, but it's softer, it's easier, but it takes you longer to get there. And he used that metaphor to kind of explain, like, this is the spiritual path. And he said, if I choose your destiny for you, it will be the right choice, but you could end up hating me. And he said, but if you choose, you'll naturally go into your comfort zone. And I was like, wow. That was such a powerful question and answer session for me. I even remember I had volunteers coming up to me without saying a word afterwards. They just came up and hugged me because I felt like they all told me they could relate to the question and the answer, and they felt like they wanted to ask a similar question. And so I had a lot of people coming up to me afterwards asking me, like, what was your interpretation of what he said? And this is my interpretation of what I think he said. Like, they would give me their input on what they thought he said, And one other cool experience I had was, I wasn't a resident at the ashram, but I was like a long-term volunteer. And because they knew me so well, they allowed me to sit in on one of the resident meetings, which is with Sadhguru. And it was much more intimate, instead of him sitting up on the dais, he's just sitting there like on the bench. And instead of us being like several yards away, I sat front row again for this, and I'm literally sitting like at his feet. And I remember like sitting there with my eyes closed, and when he's doing like, a process at the beginning of a satsang, usually like chanting or some sort of process, I just remember feeling I was being like shooken around on the inside. It was so powerful to be that, there with him. And so this whole time I'm at the ashram, Sadhguru had now left to go back to India. And this whole time at the ashram, my ex-girlfriend, who I just told you about, that we had broken up a few months earlier, she's like contacting me, and my father's contacting me asking, like, what's my plans for the future. And I don't know if this is your experience, Stephen, but I feel like both the ashrams, depending on how long you're there, can feel like a spiritual pressure cooker. While you're there, everything's so intensified. Your positive experiences, your negative experiences, and I think a lot of people feel like it's difficult to be there unless you're really aligned with everything that's happening. And I felt like I just needed to blow off some steam, and I had my ex-girlfriend who was saying to me, oh, maybe if you get your life together or whatever, maybe we can get back together, things like this. And my father's pressuring me to go back and finish university. And I went and talked to Senthil, who's one of the residents who runs the ashram there in Tennessee. And I went to him and I said, I think I'm going to go home for 2 weeks and just, be with my family and talk to them and stuff like that. I haven't seen them in a few months. And, this is like a precious time for us because our mom just passed away. And he's warning me, you shouldn't go. And I even remember I had this dream while I was there at the ashram that I had chosen to leave the ashram, and then it's sometime in the future, and then I'm standing in my driveway at home just sobbing about my choice to leave the ashram. And it was funny because later on this dream ended up becoming a true reality. Like that actually ended up happening like a few months in the future. So while I decided to leave the ashram, but I genuinely only intended to leave for 2 weeks.
Like, did you have any clarity from the question, like from asking Sadhguru a question? Did you had like, were you kind of clear about, okay, I want to do this, I want to go on this path, or was it still kind of?
No, it was still very unclear for me. And then I think, I did have one experience where Sadhguru had just finished with this like online, I forgot what it was called. He had this kind of online live stream that he used to do. And he finished that, and I was inside the kitchen washing the dishes, and I saw that this live stream that he just did, which was right next door in the dining hall, he decided to do it in there, and it just ended, and he's walking back out to his car, and I just remember I took off my apron, and I just decided to go stand there to do namaskaram to him while he walks back to his car. And normally in India, as you know, like Sadhguru has like a lot of escorts, but in here at the ashram, it's just him alone. So I'm standing there alone with Sadhguru, like at the car, and he just asked me like, how long do you plan to be here? And I said, I think I want to stay and be here for a while. I was like, okay, well, get ready for some sadhana. And then the next day we had that residence meet that I was telling you about, and he's telling us at that residence meet that he wants us to like crank our sadhana. So to answer your question, I felt like looking back retrospectively now, I think that Sadhguru was trying to tell me, wait, like be here at the ashram and just wait, and we'll take it from there. But
you left.
I ended up leaving a few weeks after that, and like I said, to this day was the worst mistake, because I genuinely, in my heart, only tended to leave for 2 weeks and just come back. Like I left a lot of my belongings there at the ashram in Tennessee, and I got back, and I had this guy I knew. He actually asked me to do like this video editing project for him. And I said, yeah, I could do this in within 1 week, I could finish it. Because in high school, I'd learned how to do video editing in this class that I took. And he just needed like an introductory video for these talks that he does, because he's like a public speaker. He said, I'll pay you $1,000 to do this project. I was like, okay, no problem. I could finish this within, a week or two. Well, I could have finished it within a week or two, but it was this constant back and forth process where I'd send him my video that I created for him, and he said, oh, I like it, but just change this one thing. So then I'd do those edits and I'd send it back to him. Oh, that looks great, but now change this and add this one thing. And it became this long process that by the time the whole project had ended and he paid me the money, it was like 6 weeks had passed. And during these 6 weeks, my father is pressuring me to go back to college and finish my degree, because he doesn't understand spending your whole life at an ashram. And my ex-girlfriend is like, oh, if you go to university, maybe we can get back together, get your life on track. And I wrote Sentil a letter, and I contacted him. Like I wrote him a letter, and I just explained the whole situation. I'm like, I'm so sorry that I said I'd be coming back in 2 weeks, and that now it's like 6 weeks later. I explained to him everything that was going on with the project that I did, and my father pressuring me and everything. And so against my intuition, I remember I ended up deciding to go to university. And it was different from community college because I commute there. Like I hop in my car, I drive there, take classes, I come home. But this was a proper university with dormitories, and I hated it there, because if you can imagine, like all the experiences I've just shared with all of you and you, Stephen, all the experiences I had, and now all of a sudden I'm living in a dormitory with a roommate, and everyone's into like partying and drinking culture and all this stuff, and I just felt it was all such nonsense, and I hated it there so badly that by the end of the semester, it's like around Christmas time of 2015 at this point, I told my father, I'm not going back. I can't do it. It's such a terrible experience, and I don't know what I'm going to do with my life, but it's not college. But one of the things that happened while I was there in university is I remember I'm sitting there at my laptop doing homework, and I get a message from another Isha meditator who I had taken a program with many years ago, and she messaged me, are you coming to the AdiYogi consecration? So at the time, the Abode of Yoga, at this big temple at the ashram wasn't finished yet. When I first went there, it was just flat ground. There was nothing there yet. So now, 2 years later in 2015, it's happening. The consecration is all planned. There's a big event for it, but I'm in university at the time. And she says, are you coming to the consecration event? I said, no, I don't have the money. It was a very expensive event, by the way. And I said, I'm in university right now. I don't have the money in my bank account to do this program or go to the consecration event. And she says, if it's really a money issue, I'll pay for you. Like I'll lend you the money and you just come, okay? You buy your plane ticket, but I'll pay for the program cost. I was like, no way, really? You'll do that for me? I can't believe that. So of course I took her offer on that. But this is a funny story. So she says, okay, meet me at the registration table when you arrive. So I message her when I get there, and we're standing there at the registration table. I hadn't registered for the program yet. And we're standing there, and she comes up to me. She's like, "Oh, by the way, I hate to tell you this, but I only have like $100 for you." I was like, "What?" The program cost is like $700. And she's telling me, as I'm standing there at the registration desk, I just flown all the way from New York, from university, to come to this event. And I'm standing there, and she's like, "Oh, I don't have any money for you." And I didn't know what to do. I started kind of like panicking within myself, and I was like, well, let's just see. I handed the registration lady my debit card. I only had maybe like $100 in my bank account, something like that. And the program cost is like $700. And some miracle, the charge goes through, and it puts my bank account in like negative $600. It wasn't like a credit card; it's a debit card, meaning it's like connected to your bank account. And some miracle that the charge went through somehow. You know, I'm so used to, like, if you don't have money in your account, it gets rejected. Like, it won't allow the transaction to go through. So I ended up being there for consecration, and I had two things I wanted to share, which is like, I was so embarrassed about how I left the ashram, in the sense that, like, I said I'd come back in 2 weeks, and then I got so caught up in my father pressuring me, and my ex-girlfriend, who, by the way, of course, to just finish up with that, of course, even though I went to college, to university at kind of her request, in hopes of us getting back together, she ended up moving on. And we didn't end up getting back together. So that was really tough for me. But anyway, so at this AdiYogi consecration, I remember I had this shawl. Actually, it's the same one that they handed out, the consecration. It's like one of those black AdiYogi shawls. I wore it around my head in shame, because I was like, I didn't want any of the residents to recognize me, because there was like there must have been like 1,000 or 2,000 people there for the event. So it was like huge. I mean, you're just one person in the crowd. But I remember like hiding my face under the shawl, because I didn't want the residents to recognize me and be like, what happened? Like, I had so much guilt in my heart about leaving. And to make it worse, we had like a satsang session with Sadhguru, and I don't know if he saw me there or not, but he was talking, and it gets to this one point. He's like, you know, I have people that come up to me. They're like, "Sadhguru, I'll give you my life." And then they say they have to go home to take care of family business, and they don't ever come back. And I was just like, oh my God. Like, he didn't use my name, but he pretty much just called me out.
Yes.
I was just, so like, the consecration event was, you know, most people would say that would have been like a beautiful experience for me, but I was in so much stress being there, because, you know, everything I was going through at college and university, and then now my bank account is in negative 600. And I'm ashamed to be there for leaving the ashram in the way that I did. And then now Sadhguru called me out and making me feel even more guilty. So I didn't have a good time when I was there. And I remember I even had to call my ex-girlfriend at the time and explain, like, hey, I actually need to borrow some money so I can buy a plane ticket back to university. And she was so mad. She gave me the money reluctantly, but she was so mad at me for even going. And so now it's January of 2016. I just finished, I quit university over Christmas break, and I told my father I'm not going back. And in January, we had In the Lap of the Master program at the ashram in Tennessee. So I went back for that. And one quick experience I'll share there is, Sadhguru was talking about like visualization and using the power of the mind to like create. Maybe, I don't know if you have the Sadhguru exclusive app. And well, there was this one where he told the same story about creating the zoo in his childhood, and how he could like almost bring someone into that zoo, like that he created in his mind. And he shared that story and talked about the power of the mind. And we did our own process where he puts up on the big screen of this close-up image of a peacock feather, which is like very colorful, very detailed. And he asked us to stare at this image for like 5 minutes straight, and then close our eyes and try and recreate the same image in our mind. And right after this process, I don't know how it always happens, but I always find myself sitting front row right in front of Sadhguru pretty much. And at this one point, he stops talking, he looks down in the crowd, and he just points, "You." And I looked at the guy next to me, and And like, and like, no, like, the guy's like, no, he's talking about you. And Sadhguru's just like, come here, stand up. And I was like, oh my God. And he has me stand up and do like any pose I wanted, like any kind of posture, any kind of pose. And he has the entire crowd just stare at me. And there's like over 1,000 people there. And he says, everyone, okay, I want you to stare at David, and I want you to imagine he's made of equilateral triangles. Like, I want you to just imagine. And that was such an embarrassing experience for me because I don't know, I just felt so embarrassed that was like probably the first time that a lot of the residents had seen me since I had left the ashram. Some of them did probably see me at the AdiYogi consecration, but now I'm standing in front of all of them and like 1,000 other Isha meditators while they're all just staring at me, like imagining that my body's made out of like triangles. And I don't know. So anyway, so this was just a 3-day event, and I went back to New York, and for most of 2016, I decided that I wanted to work in any job that I could and save up money to go travel to India. I just decided like this is what I want to do. And in like September of 2016, if you remember, Sadhguru released this book called Inner Engineering: A Yogi's Guide to Joy. So he did this tour all around the United States where he had these huge public events, and he would talk and do a public talk and do a book signing. And this is another huge regret that I have, but I went to the one in New York City, and there's a question and answer session, and I was planning this trip to India, and I got a chance to ask a question. I know I shouldn't have, looking back, because I'll tell you what happens. I pick up the microphone and I get about 3 words into my question, and Sadhguru like instantly recognizes me and just says, "Get to the question." Like, and I was like stumbling on my words after that. I was like, and I asked him, Sadhguru, like, I'm planning this trip to India, and I'm wondering if there's any significant places that you think I should visit for like my spiritual growth. And he kind of just mocks me with his answer and just says, the spiritual process is an inward process, so there's no point of trying to go somewhere else to work on your spiritual process. And it was funny because the next person who asked the question was this old man who took like 10 minutes to ask this question. Sadhguru was very patient with him. So it was such a stark contrast. So I got like 3 words into my conversation. He's like, "Get to the question." So finally, right after the new year, from 2016 going into 2017, like 4 days after the new year, I finally flew to India. And the first place I went to actually was Rishikesh. And the reason why is because one of my good friends from high school was there teaching yoga. He actually got into spirituality before I did. And he was actually initiated into TM, transcendental meditation. And he even went to a university that Maharishi Mahesh Yogi had created in the United States. So he was like a very spiritual person. And so I reached out to him and said, "Hey, I'm planning on coming to India. Like, let's connect." And he says, "Okay, come to Rishikesh." So as soon as I got to Rishikesh, I instantly fell in love. Like, there's something really special about that city because I think for a Westerner to come to India, especially at my first time being in India, to adapt to the culture, it's like the perfect mix of like, there's genuine spirituality there. There's like ashrams there. There's monks and everything. And then there's also kind of like a touristy, a lot of Westerners there. But it's also the nature around is like so beautiful. You have the Ganges River, which is super clean. It's like crystal blue. And there's mountains everywhere. You're in the foothills in the Himalayas. And I remember I ended up just staying there for about 4 months in total. And one of the experiences I had there was I remember I was walking in the street one day alone, and this small group of people were gathered in the streets, and I went over to go investigate, like, why are all these people gathered in a circle? Like, what's going on? And I guess some woman had like hurt her foot. Maybe like someone had like drove over it with a motorcycle. And then the next day, I'm walking in the streets, and the same thing. There's a group of people gathered, and I went to go investigate what's it this time, and someone hurt. And actually, I don't know if you know who this is, but it was Mooji. Do you know Mooji?
Mm-hmm.
He's like one of the spiritual teachers from the UK who's kind of has a Jamaican background. So I was like, oh my God, like I wasn't expecting this at all. I knew he was planning on coming to the city for like, he does like 6 weeks of satsang, like almost every day. And I saw the flyers when I was in the city, but I just wasn't thinking about it. And I literally essentially bumped into him. You know, I see this small group of people gathered in a circle in the middle of the street, and I walk over to see, and it's Mooji standing there. He's greeting different, you know, devotees and stuff. And one of his disciples comes up to me and says, if you want to say hello, you know, just come over to the front and just wait your turn. And I was like, okay. And then within a few seconds, the person walks away, and then it's just me and Mooji, like face to face. And I just do namaskaram to Mooji, and he does namaskaram back, but then he reaches his hand out to like shake my hand. And this weird experience happened where we shook hands, you know, and he wouldn't let go. And he's doing this weird process where he's like pushing his thumb into like the space between my thumb and my pointer finger. He's just doing this weird, like pulsating, like pushing. And he starts walking. But if you can imagine, my right hand is with his right hand, and he starts walking forward. I almost have to start like walking backwards or have my arm like this because he wouldn't let go of my hand. And he's walking forward, and he's just asking me like, oh, like, what are you here for in Rishikesh? And I explained, you know, a few things, and I spoke with him for, you know, like a minute or something. And then I ended up going to one of his satsangs there for a few days. And I guess my experience of being there is like definitely like powerful energy and everything. And I you know, it's easy to come into a certain state of presence there with him. But it's just not the same as being with Sadhguru. I think like once you're initiated, you know, with Sadhguru and you kind of connect to his energy, it's a different quality, you know. And
I like his talks. I do enjoy some of the things that he says. He has a very loving and gentle way of speaking, and it's, you know, it does bring you into a certain state of ease and love. I feel his message is mostly love.
Yeah, that was actually what I felt. I remember I made a Facebook post like that day when I met Mooji. I made a Facebook post, and that was literally what I said. I said like his presence was one of just pure compassion. Like that's all I could describe as he was just radiating that sense of compassion. Remember that story I told you where I met Sadhguru in the hotel, and he just puts his arm around me? It was kind of that same just energy of just pure compassion and pure love. And that was the sense that I got from him as well. And it was inspired by Mooji's story. That you can follow this YouTube video of him talking about his experience of enlightenment and you know, meeting his guru and stuff. So definitely a super inspiring guy to meet and to follow and stuff like that. And I had one other person that I randomly bumped into while I was there in Rishikesh, and this is a crazy story. So there's a Isha meditator from Montreal, Canada, who I was volunteering with as a full-time, you know, volunteer at the ashram in Tennessee back in 2015. Well, here it is, like almost 2 years later, and we hadn't spoken at all, hadn't kept in contact with each other. And one day after finishing breakfast at this cafe, I'm walking across the street, and I see him walking across the street. I'm like, Matthew, no way. And I run up to him, Matthew, it's me. And he's shocked to see me because like he lives in Canada, I live in New York, and now we just met in the middle of the street in Rishikesh, India. Like no planning at all.
Is that the coordinator, Matthew?
No.
Oh, okay.
I mean, maybe he is a coordinator now. Maybe I don't know. I don't think so.
I mean the one from Sadhanapada.
Oh no, it wasn't
okay.
him. No.
Okay.
But let's see. So he told me that he had actually just spent time at the Isha Yoga Center in India, and that he hitchhike meaning like stick your thumb out and just ask for a free ride. He had done that all the way from South India, way up into North India, where I was in Rishikesh. And he tells me this, and he said he's planning on going to Kathmandu, Nepal, which is the capital city in Nepal. And I told him, actually, I've been planning to go there myself because, as you know, Stephen, when you have a visa, you have to leave every 6 months for a short period of time in order to renew it. So I was like 4 months in about. And I said, well, my 6 months is coming up soon, and this would be a great opportunity. And so the two of us, we stayed in Rishikesh for maybe like a day or two after we met each other, and we decided to hitchhike together all the way from Rishikesh to Kathmandu, which is a huge journey. I mean, it took us at least a week to get there, and it was such a experience because you're so vulnerable. You have to open yourself and be vulnerable. Like, I don't know who I'm gonna meet. I don't know where I'm gonna sleep tonight. I don't know where I'm gonna get my next meal. And as you leave Rishikesh, it becomes more and more rural to the point where they've never even seen a Westerner before. A lot of them don't speak English. So it's such an incredible experience to travel like that way, because you would get rides from people who they don't want money from you. They can't even communicate with you and like get to know who you are because there's a language barrier. But they're just, I want to tell people whenever coronavirus is over to definitely travel through India if you can, because like India is such like an accepting, like hospitality kind of culture of just being so giving. And so it was an incredible experience to hitchhike across India and Nepal together. Like, there was one night where it was starting to get dark, and we just asked the guy who was driving us to pull over, and we walk into a farmer's field and just set up a tent I had brought with me, and we just slept in the tent. We didn't have a hotel to stay in, so we just set up a tent and stayed in the tent together and did our sadhana the next morning, and then continued our journey. And so it was such an incredible experience to do that with another Isha meditator who I just literally randomly bumped into. So when we finally got to Kathmandu, Nepal, we decided to split ways from there because he actually was continuing his journey all the way into China, because he had booked a flight from China all the way back to Canada. And I decided to return back to Rishikesh. So I flew from there all the way back to Rishikesh. And one of the things I decided to do was I decided to hike up the Ganges River, just follow the river a few kilometers up into the mountains. And I found this spot that was like secluded. And it's like there's a spot of forest and right by the Ganges River. And I set up my tent there and camped out there for 3 days, just doing sadhana and this kind of thing. And it's funny because I saw you had Isaiah on the podcast. And that was the same spot that I showed him later when we traveled there, because I told him how much of a powerful experience it was to just be there. And because you're all alone in this space out in nature. The only company I had were monkeys who try and steal my stuff. And, you're taking your daily dips in the Ganges River. A lot of people's idea of the Ganges River is like maybe like the city of Kashi or Varanasi, where there's like dead bodies floating in there and it's disgusting and dirty. But this is like way up in the mountains where it's all fresh and clean. And so it was a powerful experience being there. But I remember I brought a book to read with me, which is Mystic Musings. And I remember reading it and just feeling like, why am I here in the woods by myself? I feel like I should go and be at Sadhguru's ashram. So finally, I went back to Rishikesh, and I decided to book a plane ticket back, actually from there to Coimbatore, to go visit the Isha Yoga Center for the first time. But the problem is I had spent so much time there in India already that I started to run out of savings, because that's essentially how I was living. Is I didn't have any source of income. I just worked all of 2016, saved up money, and now was living off savings my entire time there. So unfortunately, when I traveled to Coimbatore, I had already pre-booked my plane ticket back to the United States. So I got there to the Isha Yoga Center and instantly fell in love, as you can imagine. It was my first time there. And I stayed as a long-term volunteer until my plane ticket time was to go. And I remember I even asked another meditator who was there, I said, can you, call the booking office for me, because they speak Hindi. And I said, can you try and see if you can like cancel my ticket and get a refund so that I could extend my stay here at Isha Yoga Center? Well, he did try and call for them, but he couldn't he couldn't cancel and get a full refund for the ticket. So I had to leave because I had no money left. I had just spent my last bit of money on my return ticket, and the date was now coming up. So 2017, I had to head back to America. And from there, I just continued to go back to work. And then in early 2018, I volunteered for the first like BSP program in America that was taught by a teacher. And I remember that being like a really powerful experience for me. Because a lot of people say, there's a difference when you take a program when Sadhguru is there, and there's a difference when he's not there. And sometimes the energy is different. And I remember this being actually almost more powerful, just volunteering this time when he wasn't there. So now it's 2018, the year of Sadhanapada. And I shared this at the first satsang we had, or not satsang, experience when you were there. But basically in 2018, I had my life externally was like so well. I was living in a beautiful town. I had a great paying job. I had friends. I was on a sports team. And like externally, I had everything. I had a nice motorcycle I was driving because I learned to ride while I was in India for the first time. And externally, everything is going great, And I remember just slowly, I'll share this one experience. When I was living in this town that I was telling you about, I'm walking down the street to go to the gym. And I had my earbuds in, I'm listening to music. And I bump into this guy who's handing out flyers. And I look at the flyer and take my earbuds out because he's trying to talk to me as he hands me this flyer. And it was this kirtan club. Kirtan is where you sing and chant together, kind of like the Sanskrit chants and stuff. And he's trying to sell copies of the Bhagavad Gita. And I asked him, like, who are you? Like, tell me your story. And I shared a little bit about my history, on the spiritual path. And he tells me that he used to be a monk, like the full orange robe, shaved his head, and he's standing there on the sidewalk now selling copies of the Bhagavad Gita, trying to get people to come to the club to do this chanting every week. And he has his wife in the car now. Like, of course, when he was a monk, he was single. And now he's with a wife who's now breastfeeding their newborn child in the car right there. And I don't know why, but I remember this being very impactful for me because I kind of saw a little bit of him in me. I was never initiated into like, Brahmacharya or anything, but I remember kind of seeing like the same process of happening of like, this guy was a monk for many years with his guru at an ashram in India. And now he just left and was now like, had a wife and kid. And I just saw the path that he took. And I remember that kind of sparked a little bit of interest in like, thinking about the journey that I was on, which is currently now kind of living in a lavish lifestyle of having things that I wanted. I had money, I had a nice environment and a nice apartment and everything, And I shared this with you at Sadhanapada in the public talk that we had, like where I stood up in front of the Sadhanapada crowd and shared my experience of why I came to Sadhanapada. But essentially, I just had this burning, it came like very slowly, like gradual over a period of several weeks. I just had this burning desire to go to the ashram. I didn't know which ashram. I just knew I wanted to go back and do sadhana. And I tried to ignore it for a while because I was enjoying my job. I was enjoying my sports team. I tried to like just shove it away and ignore it. But then it burned so intensely, like this desire, like somewhere within me, I wanted to go back. And, but the thing is, like, I had so much going on externally that was so well. And I remember sort of internally, I sort of like prayed to Sadhguru. I was like, Sadhguru, if this is really what I should go do right now, please give me some sort of sign, because I don't want to just drop everything that I have now and just decide to go be like a long-term volunteer or something. Well, within like a day or two after that kind of inner prayer that I had, I got an email about the announcement for the Sadhanapada program. And not that long after that, there was also an email about something called the consecration training, if you remember. And it was funny because I remember when I was there in that town living there, I had this desire to like maybe rent out like a retail space and maybe consider getting like a Devi yantra or a Dhyanalinga yantra or some sort of consecrated thing and have some sort of space where people could come and meditate. like complete strangers, like just anyone in the public could come and meditate. And I had this strong desire. I wanted to create like a consecrated space, through the yantras that Isha offers, and have people come and sit there. Of course, I never followed through with it because, buying a retail and renting a retail space and getting yantra. But it was just a thought that I had of something I wanted to do in the future. And so when I saw Sadhanapada, I saw this consecration training, I was like, I have to apply for this. I have to do this. Like, it was just a no-brainer. And so I did my interview for Sadhanapada, and I got accepted. And from there, I just dropped everything that I had. Like, I quit my sports team. I sold my motorcycle. I got rid of my apartment. I threw away a lot of my belongings that I couldn't bring with me on my travel. And I went home to go visit my family for a few days, and then I flew off to Sadhanapada. And as you remember, when I got there, I was just like on fire. Like, I was doing 2 Shakti Chalana Kriyas a day, doing Hatha Yoga, doing 2 Shambhavis. And I remember one of the first sessions we had in Spunda Hall, I remember sitting there, and I don't know if you ever watched Dragon Ball Z growing up, where like Goku goes Super Saiyan, he has the fire around him. I felt like that. I felt like I was physically, energetically like on fire. I remember that so distinctly. And I think one of the things that happened was that just slowly over time, I just started to open up more and more and socialize a little bit more and more and socialize a little bit more and more. And slowly, like, my sadhana started to fall, and, and it just was, so Sadhanapada was a really tough experience for me throughout. Like, I'd say the first half was going really good. And I remember seeing a lot of people about 3 months in were choosing to leave the program. And I remember like, oh, maybe is this, should I leave? Is this so intense for me? Is this like, I was going through a lot of struggles internally with being there. Like, for anyone who's just kind of having a hard time understand this, like, the ashram is literally what I call like a spiritual pressure cooker, where it's really difficult to be there unless you're really aligned with everything that's happening. And if you're even, not aligned even just a little bit, it starts to like affect you and feel almost like hard to be there, in that space and that energy. And the funny thing is, when I was there for the first half, I remember one of the coordinators called me over for a meeting, and they actually asked me, like, they extended the invitation and said, do you want to be part of the consecration training? I said, absolutely, yes. And I asked them, like, when is it beginning? Like, can you tell me any details? And she says, I don't know any of the details yet. Just wait and we'll get back to you. And I remember thinking, like, when is this going to happen? I wanted the details. But slowly over time, I was just socializing too much, and kind of the sadhana train was slowing down. And I actually thought that maybe like there was something physically health-wise wrong with me, because I remember just feeling tired. So I even went to one of the coordinators and I said, I think I want to go get like a vitamin B12 test and like have my blood test taken to see if maybe I'm just like feeling low energy. And I did go and do that, but it turns out my levels were like perfectly fine. I was healthy. Blood test came back normal. So I was, okay, maybe it's just me. Like, looking back retrospectively, it was 100% socializing is what threw me off, because like I was very quiet. If you remember in the beginning of Sadhanapada.
Yeah, you were one of the most intense people in the beginning.
I remember that actually one of the Indian guys, he was one of the older guys. He came up to me one day. He's like, you're one of the most inspiring people in this program for me. Like,
yes,
you're just like you're like what I want to be. He said that to me. I was so ashamed. I was like, what are you talking about? And yeah, so that was my downfall. Essentially, was just socializing too much, and I think the socializing reduced my energy levels, and so less sadhana was happening. And there was this, I don't even remember his name, because this isn't like an important thing to me, but there was this participant in the program who was kind of given like a coordinator position. He was still a participant, but he was like one of the coordinators essentially. And anytime we had any kind of interaction, he would always give me such a hard time and kind of almost be a little bit rude to me. And I just didn't say anything the whole time. And then finally, this is like 5 days before the culmination ceremony of Sadhanapada. It's like now 7 months has gone by. The program's almost over. And I was supposed to help clean the dormitory. And I was part of the Samyama registration team at the time. That was my volunteer activity. And so I had to walk back from that office to come back to the dormitory to help clean. And I was like 5 minutes late because of that. Like we were supposed to be in at a certain time. I was like 5 minutes late. And as I walk in, this coordinator participant that I was just telling you about, he starts ranting me like, why are you late? Everyone's here cleaning. Like why are, like you're slacking? And he's just going off on me. And I just flipped on him. Like I blew up at him. I had like all this built up anger of probably everything that was going on, but also the way he was talking to me. And like Isaiah was standing right next to me. And I just blew up at him. I was like cursing at him. I was like, like, blah, blah, blah. And he immediately, went to one of the coordinators and told what happened. And the next day, Ravi, who is now a Swami, sits me down. He's like, I heard what happened, and we've made the decision to ask you to leave the program. And I was so heartbroken because the culmination ceremony of the program is literally 3 days away. And I'm explaining like, please, the culmination is in like 3 days. I just want to finish the program and everything. And he tells me, this program's not about having a certificate or a t-shirt at the end of the program to say I finished. It's about the transformation that happened to you. So I told him like, why are you kicking me out of the program? There's people in the dormitories who they don't do any morning sadhana, and then they skip their activity and just like lay in bed on their phone watching YouTube. Maybe you kind of remember a few of those people. And I was like, why are you kicking me out? Why are you not kicking those kind of people out? And he's like, those people won't get anything from the program. Like you stayed in the program, he just said, this is not about finishing the program. It's about what you got over these last 7 months. And I remember looking back on that really fondly because it was so true, to just talk about kind of my transformation after Sadhanapada. I just noticed that I'm just much more stable in terms of like everything externally that's happening in my life. I still feel like the same, like 2020 was a hard year for everyone, right? With the coronavirus and everything. And yet I felt stable, the same person. Like I feel like internally it didn't affect me and all these things. So like Sadhanapada for me really brought like a certain sense of stability and inwardly, and also just my physical transformation in the sense that like I can sit for like much longer period of time with my back straight. And I remember you had another person on this podcast who talked about if you just like align your hips and your pelvis with the rest of your back. And I remember I had discovered that while I was there at Sadhanapada, maybe from doing so much hatha yoga, the yogasanas, that like my hips and my pelvis aligned. And all of a sudden now I could sit in like Dhyanalinga for like 2 hours or something like that, because certain alignment of my body happened. So, and that stayed with me now. Like I could sit, no backrest for at least like an hour plus. And, so I don't know, that's kind of my story of just everything that I went through. And I don't want to share too much about the Sadhanapada because, of course, there might be some people watching this who want to know about like the details of what happens in Sadhanapada, but you're just doing an intense schedule. I think if you remember when I first got there, I was doing like, I'd wake up at like 3 a.m, do like something like 7 hours of sadhana or something in the morning. And then you go have breakfast, you go to your volunteer activity, and then you have like evening, there's like the presence and darshan, and then, dinner. And so it was an intense schedule. You're doing that 7 days a week, and a lot of other activities in between. But I'm just happy that over those 7 months that I never quit. I was asked to leave the program. They didn't ask me to leave the ashram, by the way. they just asked me to step out of the program and be like a long-term volunteer or, be a guest or whatever. But in terms of being like official Sadhanapada participant, that's what I was asked to step out of. So it's kind of ironic that it happened. That was Robbie telling me, because I had known him for such a long time. And I even said that to him. I was like, man, we've known each other for a long time. He's like, I know, that's why I was so surprised that this is happening and that happened to you. And right after like Mahashivratri, Isaiah and I decided to travel together, and we stopped in Goa, which is this kind of beach state of India, it's like tropical paradise. I mean, I think Isaiah described it, I remember on his podcast, of like, it's such a great place to just relax and let off some steam. And as he said, the people there are like, they're spiritual people, but they're kind of more like hippies. They're not serious about it. They don't have their own sadhana that they're doing, but they're really wonderful, nice people to meet. And we stayed there for 2 weeks, kind of just relaxing on the beach, going swimming. And then I brought him to Rishikesh. We flew to Rishikesh, and I kind of showed him around. And then from there, I had started to run out of money once again because I'm just running off savings. And it was time for me to come back to the United States. So, and since then I've been working, and essentially, I don't really know what my future holds yet, but right now I've kind of been in a process of, I would call it kind of like a shedding, where I'm trying to shed a lot of like material things that I no longer need. And I also feel like I'm going through like an internal shedding of just like all the things that are just extra weight on me. I'm just getting rid of. And I don't know what my future holds. I think I would love to see in 2021, maybe save up more money and go back to India to travel and, maybe be at the ashram or something like that. So we'll see what the future holds for me.
Now looking back at coming from the ashram home, how would you say is being back at home after 7 months or, and then traveling in India, how did that change in terms of your approach to the outside world, your approach to work, your approach to the people that surround you, living situation?
Well, one of the things is when I was there at the last end of Sadhanapada, and I knew I'd be going home at some point, I decided to purchase a Devi Gudi. It's like this small consecrated linga. And so at home, I realized the importance of creating a space for, kind of conducive space. So I have, and then, at some point I did end up purchasing later on a Dhyana Linga Yantra. So I have like a small shrine that ironically, I ended up with a 2-bedroom apartment where I'm at now. And so it's like one room is like specifically like I set up in a certain way. So it's like, I think one of the things I learned was like you have to have a conducive space at home for sadhana to happen and to kind of live in that, certain presence and energy. So I have a Devi Gudi and I do like puja. I keep the lamp lit every day and then do sadhana there. And so I think that was one of the biggest things is being in the ashram is such an energetically different space than anywhere else. Like, I'm sure you experience that you step outside of the gate, it feels energetically different than being in the space. And in order to try and keep that energy space, like I said, I got a Devi Gudi and I got a Dhyana Linga Yantra. I have like a small shrine with Sadhguru's photo. And so I think that was one important thing is just making sure I have a consecrated space in my own home. I put a lot of plants there and keep it clean and just certain things to just liven up the space and have a good sadhana space. So that was one big thing that changed because that wasn't something that I had at all before I went to Sadhanapada. And then in terms of interacting with people, Sadhguru talks a lot about it. It's just like, don't talk about anybody who's not there. So I always try to make sure to like, socially, am I behaving? Am I being acceptable? Is this any conversation I'm having with someone is this gonna like be fruitful for them? Or is this gonna be So one thing, I always stay away from like negative conversation of talking bad about, either complaining about situations or complaining about people. That's one thing that changed a lot. Yeah. So those some of the biggest changes that I've had, and just in general, more emotional stability since Sadhanapada finished. And I think just doing 7 months of intense sadhana in a space like that, I remember watching a Sadhguru who's speaking to the Sadhanapada class that after we went, the next year. He said, like, this 7 months here at the ashram is like an insurance for you, that no matter where you go in the world, what's happening in the world externally, this is an insurance that you'll always be in a certain way. And that's ended up being true for me, that like no matter what's going on, there's still a certain balance always happening, which I don't think I ever experienced before Sadhanapada, despite everything that I had experienced before. Because, like the longest time I ever done like intense sadhana like that was maybe 3 months in Tennessee,
That's wonderful. I love that. I have the same experience, especially with the consecrated space.
Really?
I was one of the people in the beginning. I had no idea about Dhyana Linga. I had no idea about Devi. I was like, what is this? Why does Sadhguru have, like, why does this ashram have temples? I thought this is not a religion. I had to, like, the conclusion within me was there that if there is a temple, that means this is a religion. And I was like staying away from the temples, and I didn't want to, take part in it. And now having the Devi Gudi, lighting a lamp, keeping the lamp on always, and just seeing how much of a difference it makes when you keep like you said, keeping the area in a certain way, and just making the space conducive. It's like the key for me.
Yeah. It's almost like physical for me, because like I said, I have like a 2-bedroom apartment, and like you cross the threshold of the door into the room that I have, where I have the shrine and everything, it's like completely different.
Yes.
Like it's like the energy is almost thick in the air,
Yeah, when I come back home from anywhere, I'm just like, finally I'm back.
Yeah. And that's why I'm always thinking about the future, is like I think, whatever I do in my life, I think it's having a consecrated space is really important. And whether that's you decide to be in the ashram or you create it in your home, that's got to be like one of the most important things. It's just have some sort of energy space.
What is that one thing that you wish to accomplish? Is there anything that you have, like you shared about creating a consecrated space? Is there anything right now that is there for you as a vision, as something that you want to do, or is it just keeping it open, going back to India and throwing yourself again into some like long-term period of sadhana?
Well, I don't know about you, but by the time Sadhanapada had ended, I still hadn't heard anything from any of the coordinators about like, okay, this is when the program for consecration and training is starting. And but anyways, 3 days before the program ended, I'd anyways been asked to leave the program. So I was like, well, I'm not going to be invited to the program anymore, regardless. And I never heard anything myself about the program, about being part of consecration training. I don't know if it ended up happening or not, or if it's kind of happening in a little bit of secrecy, or like quiet, if Sadhguru's choosing certain people, and that's happening kind of under wraps. I don't know. But in terms of my future, I mean, one of the things I found is that no matter what you have kind of going on externally, it never really hits that spot that you feel when you're at the ashram. When you're really in that consecrated space. I mean, I'll have really wonderful experiences doing my sadhana here at home, but there's definitely something about being in that space at one of the ashrams. It's just, so I always dream about going back at some point. And I do want to visit I know some other people in your other podcast talked about it, and I had planned my first trip, but I never ended up going, to visit some of the Jyotirlingas, which are some of the more, what even Sadhguru's talked about them. They're like the really powerfully consecrated lingas throughout India. So those are some I want to go visit. I never visit one's all the way up in Kedarnath, which is like way up into the Himalayas, like where there's snow-covered peaks, and I've seen images of it. And so that's something I want to do in the future, is go visit more consecrated spaces outside of the ashram
Mm-hmm.
and see how those impact me. And just so those are kind of some of the things I have on my soon bucket list within the next year or two, is go visit some of these places, and then maybe spend more time at the ashram in India and kind of just take life from there.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed your sharing, because also the different spaces of the US ashram, how everything was there, and then coming to India, and then being 3 months at the US ashram, a totally different experience than being 7 months at the Isha Yoga Center.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you had so many intimate. Intimate can be even if Sadhguru is not there. Like you can be intimate with him, but I feel like his, in terms of his like physical presence, it was very, very, very much there for you, which for some reason you had that, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
It's a blessing.
Yeah, no,
Thank you for sharing.
I'm very grateful for those experiences. I don't know how they happened either. I mean, some of it was a genuine longing. Like, for instance, when I'm sitting in a satsang with Sadhguru, if I'm all the way in the back, it's easier to get distracted and start looking everywhere and not paying attention to him. But when you're sitting right in front of him, it's like I'm not even blinking. I'm just staring straight into his eyes, hands open, like just trying to be there with him. And so I think because of that stark difference for me, and we're to like focus and be there with him. I've always tried to strive to sit in the front row with him. So almost it was kind of like a running joke at the ashram of like, especially during Sadhanapada, I used to joke with people. I was like, watch, I'm going to somehow end up sitting front row. And it almost always happened. And it's just because I long to like be there and have that kind of close physical proximity. And I know there's, a way to connect with him outside of that, of course. But at least when I'm there, I want to take the opportunity to try and be close to him so I can focus and be there with him. Because I remember asking someone, another Isha meditator, I said, if you could, would you sit front row? He's like, no, I'm so scared of him. I was like, and one of the experiences I felt over time is like, one of the first times I met Sadhguru, he was always very like loving and compassionate towards me. But as my growth happened, and I saw him more and more in person, he would actually be harsher and harsher on me. Like, actually, one of the first times I told you at that sadhana satsang, we had this session where I'm sitting front row, and he looks down at me, and we had all name tags on, and he says, David, what's your favorite food? Or some person in the back row screamed, pizza! And he's like, no, let him finish. And even now, one of my favorite foods to make is smoothies, like, just like fruit and vegetable smoothies all mixed in. I said, no, I think, smoothies is probably my favorite food. He's like, well, imagine, because the question somebody asked him was, can you force enlightenment on one of your disciples? Can you just like pour it into them? And his metaphor for that is, he asked me, what's your favorite food? And I said, smoothies. And he said, okay, well, would you like me to force feed like 10 kilos of smoothie? I said, no. He's like, well, that's what it's like. He said, that's, if I were to forcefully make you grow, it'd be like a rape almost, it'd be like taking something that you enjoy and just like, raping you with it almost, So that's what spiritually, experientially it would be like to like forcefully grow someone like energetically when they're not ready. So, like I said, like I only brought that interaction up just now because it's like every time I interacted with him in the early days, he was always so like joking with me, smiling, and so compassionate. And then as time went on, he just got harsher and harsher on me, Like I remember I ended up sitting front row for the culmination ceremony that we had with Sadhguru and Sadhanapada. And I was so happy about that I could sit, back straight for such a long time and everything. And I remember he looks down at me, and I remember he was talking. He said something like, being able to sit still with your back straight. And, he's like mocking me in a way. Like he was just saying something like, stillness is not about just being able to sit still with your back straight. And I'm only bringing that up because like just to hit on the fact that like he just, every time I see him now, he's so harsh on me. He's always like, so I don't know. I don't know what other people's experiences are, but now it's, but I've heard he's that way with some people, like depends on the situation, right? It depends on the person and
what they need most.
Yeah. And I was at that point where I needed like tough love and, like a parent, that's what a lot of parents do, they give tough love.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's been my experience. And I wanted to share this with everyone, for all the people who are watching this later on. I just wanted to share my journey because I had, as you guys all listened to the last, however long it's been, hour or two, that, I had my ups and downs, and I had a lot of really wonderful experiences, and I had some mistakes that I made. And I think that at some point, someone's going to watch this and be able to like learn from it. And I kind of just wanted to make this as like an offering so that, when other people watch, and they can try and gain something from it, maybe not make certain same mistakes, or just to learn from my own experience. And I can kind of share, what happened with me, and someone will be able to learn from it and gain something from it, as I'm hoping.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much for taking the time to come into the podcast, share your experience.
Yeah, no problem. I apologize you didn't get to ask us many questions. I was just long-winded,
Every podcast is different. Every podcast is individual, and the most important thing is just the willingness to share with others. And I feel that many people will be very interested in hearing all these experiences, because as I said, I don't feel that many people get to experience this. So even me listening to you experience this, for me, that's enough. I don't feel like I need to be with Sadhguru in an elevator, but it's like, that's like such an interesting experience to have, and how everything happened for you also. It's so wonderful. And also you being honest about it, not saying like, oh, I did everything the perfect way. No, I did, this mistake, and I did do this. And I love also that you're not saying, hey, you should do it the same way that I did it. But you're just saying, this is the way that it happened for me, and now I look at it and I see that, these are the things that I could have improved on, and I'm working on now. So that's, I really enjoyed the sharing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was actually a blessing for me to come on the podcast because, a lot of people that I know, they only heard bits and pieces of everything, like even some of my close friends from high school, they've never heard a lot of this stuff. They don't even know like why I got into spirituality or anything. So I definitely will share this on my Facebook, and I hopefully this will be an opportunity for people who do and do not know me to kind of understand what I went through and my choices, my experiences, and everything. And so yeah, thank you so much for inviting me to be on the podcast.
Thank you.
I hope as many people can gain something beneficial out of this, and I hope that we all cross paths again someday.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, thank you again.
Feel free to subscribe, like, and share, comment, and we will be very happy to have you join on more. Namaskar.